you're going to hear more about the details of the experiment from Administrator Ruby and Director Budil. But first, I'm going to turn it over to the President's Science Advisor and Director of the OSTP, Dr. Arati Prabhakar. Dr. Prabhakar.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Secretary Granholm. What a pleasure to be invited to come celebrate this amazing moment here at the Department of Energy. It's really a privilege to be here. So when I heard this news, for me, the years fell away, and all of a sudden it was 1978. I was a summer student in the middle of my college years, 19-year-old kid, and I got the chance to go work at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And I showed up, and so you got to picture this. I'm wearing my bell bottoms, I've got long black hair, and I show up, and I'm a 19-year-old kid, and they give me a laser to work on. And I said, this is cool, I like lasers, but what's this laser all about? And they said, we think that if you point enough lasers at a pellet of fuel, we want to see if we can get more energy released from fusion than the amount of energy that the lasers deliver into that pellet. And I said, well, that's cool. And I spent 3 months working on this fun laser. And, and after my adventure with the laser that summer in Livermore ended, I went off and did completely unrelated things. But I have always kept an eye out and watched to see what was happening at Livermore as they pursued this idea of ignition, of achieving this kind of controlled fusion reaction for decades. And I went off and didn't do anything more about fusion, but the people I worked with and their successors kept going. And they went through periods of triumph, and they went through tremendous struggles and setbacks. They never lost sight of this goal. And last week, lo and behold, indeed, they shot a bunch of lasers at a pellet of fuel, and more energy was released from that fusion ignition than the energy of the lasers going in. And I just think this is such a tremendous example of what perseverance really can achieve. And I had the great pleasure of meeting the team, whom you'll talk with when you hear the panel in a little while. And they have come from many different parts of the world. They've studied many different fields. Many of them were summer students at Livermore, but decades after I was. So it took not just one generation, but generations of people pursuing this goal. And it's a scientific milestone, scientific energy break even to achieve this. But of course, as with all of these kinds of complex scientific undertakings, it's also an engineering marvel beyond belief. And this duality of advancing the research, building the complex engineering systems, both sides learning from each other, this is how we do really big, hard things. So this is just a beautiful example. So, I also have been reflecting on how long the journey can be from knowing to doing, because it's a century since we figured out that it was fusion that was going on in our sun and all the other stars. And in that century, it took so many different kinds of advances that ultimately came together to the point that we could replicate that fusion activity in this controllable way in a laboratory. And I think it's just a reminder that sometimes, even when we know something, it's a very long time before we can turn it into something that we can actually harness and start to be able to use. And as the Secretary described, I think it's that prospect now is one step closer in a really exciting way. Okay, so let me just finish by saying I think this is an amazing example of the power of America's research and development enterprise. This is what the Department of Energy works every day to support and to drive. It's what our Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House focuses on every day, is how do we strengthen and advance this enterprise. And it is an enterprise that President Biden has championed in a way that no one really ever has before. He's submitted a budget for supporting federal R&D that is the biggest ever that we've had in this country. And so I want to take a moment and congratulate the entire Department of Energy with Secretary Granholm's tremendous leadership, the National Nuclear Security Administration here that has championed this effort for so long, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and especially and particularly all the scientists and engineers across many years who got us to this moment. President Biden loves to say that the one word that defines America is possibilities, and this is such a wonderful example of a possibility realized, a scientific milestone achieved, and a road ahead to the possibilities for clean energy and even deeper understanding of the scientific principles that are at play here. So thanks again, congratulations, and all the best from the White House. And now, thank you. Thanks so much. And now it's my privilege to get to introduce Jill Ruby. She is the Undersecretary for Nuclear Security here at the Department of Energy and also the Administrator of NNSA.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Dr. Prabhakar, for joining NNSA to celebrate our incredible achievement. And thank you, Secretary Granholm, for kicking us off and being such a tremendous supporter of science. This success would not be possible without the strong support for foundational research by the U.S. government and by the sustained investment in our national laboratories. Monday, December 5th, 2022, was an important day in science. Reaching ignition in a controlled fusion experiment is an achievement that has come after more than 60 years of global research, development, engineering, and experimentation. The people at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories National Ignition Facility reached this ignition milestone because of the work others did before them, their analysis of data and models, their continued pursuit to have the best possible facility, and their sheer excellence and grit. I would like to thank the members of Congress, thank you so much for being here today, that supported the National Ignition Facility, because your belief in the promise of visionary science has been critical for our mission. I'd also like to thank the international partners that worked with us on this, because their collaboration demonstrates the power and possibility of advancing scientific pursuits. But finally, a giant thank you to the talented federal defense programs and national security enterprise teams that supported this work at Lawrence Livermore. We are so proud of the accomplishments of our Livermore's National Ignition Facility. The National Ignition Facility is the world's largest and most energetic laser system. During experiments, 192 high-energy lasers converge on a target about the size of a peppercorn, heating a capsule of deuterium and tritium to over 3 million degrees Celsius and briefly simulating the conditions of a star. In achieving ignition, the researchers at Lawrence Livermore have opened a new chapter in NNSA's Science-Based Stockpile Stewardship Program, enabling us to study new regimes. Along with this, we have taken the first tentative steps towards a clean energy source that could revolutionize the world. Earlier this year, I had the opportunity to remember the 30th anniversary of Divider, the last explosives nuclear weapons test conducted by the United States. In reflecting on Divider, I spoke of how far our stockpile stewardship program has come, and in how many ways we now understand our nuclear weapons better than we did when we were testing. Unlocking ignition at NIF will allow us to probe the extreme conditions found at the center of nuclear explosions and address significant, long-standing stewardship questions. The unprecedented nature of reaching ignition confirms what I and previous administrators of the NNSA have been saying for decades. There is no more dedicated or more talented group of scientists in the world, as it should be. The tireless efforts of thousands of people from around the national security enterprise, nuclear security enterprise, and their predecessors are responsible for this breakthrough. We honor their intelligence, their commitment, and their determination. Going forward, we know we will make further breakthroughs. We'll have further setbacks. But all of this is in the interest of promoting national security, pushing towards a clean energy future, and redefining the boundaries of what's possible. Thank you for being here. I'd like to introduce Marv Adams, the Deputy Administrator for Defense Programs, to speak on this achievement.
Thank you, Administrator Ruby. A paraphrasal of Abraham Lincoln strikes me as fitting here. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did at the National Ignition Facility. So let's recap. A team at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, National Ignition Facility made the following happen. There's a tiny cylinder here at the end of this that you probably can't see. It's about so tall and this wide. Inside that was a small spherical capsule about half the diameter of a BB. 192 laser beams entered from the two ends of the cylinder and struck the inner wall. They didn't strike the capsule, they struck the inner wall of this cylinder and deposited energy, and that happened in less time than it takes light to move 10 feet. So it's kind of fast. X-rays from the wall impinged on the spherical capsule. Fusion fuel in the capsule got squeezed. Fusion reactions started. This had all happened before, 100 times before. But last week, for the first time, they designed this experiment so that the fusion fuel stayed hot enough, dense enough, and round enough for long enough that it ignited. And it produced more energies than the lasers had deposited. About 2 megajoules in, about 3 megajoules out, a gain of 1.5. The energy production took less time than it takes light to travel 1 inch. Kind of fast. So this is pretty cool. I have a special message to listeners who want to work on exciting, challenging, and important problems. We're hiring. So, fusion is an essential process in modern nuclear weapons, and fusion also has the potential for abundant clean energy. As you have heard, and we'll hear more, the breakthrough at NIF does have ramifications for clean energy. More immediately, this achievement will advance our national security in at least 3 ways. First, it will lead to laboratory experiments that help NNSA defense programs continue to maintain confidence in our deterrent without nuclear explosive testing. Second, it underpins the credibility of our deterrent by demonstrating world-leading expertise in weapons-relevant technologies. That is, we know what we're doing. Third, continuing to assure our allies that we know what we're doing and continuing to avoid testing will advance our non-proliferation goals, also increasing our national security. The achievement we celebrate today illustrates that big, important accomplishments often take longer and require more effort than originally thought, and that these accomplishments are often more than worth that time and effort that they took. With that, I would like to welcome my friend and colleague, Dr. Kim Budell, the director of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, to speak about her laboratory's achievements.
Madam Secretary, Dr. Prabhakar, Administrator Ruby, and Deputy Administrator Adams, thank you for your remarks today and for your support. This is a historic achievement for the team at Livermore, our collaborators in academia and labs in the US and abroad, our industry partners, the fusion community writ large, and the many supporters and stakeholders in the National Nuclear Security Administration, the Department of Energy, and in Congress, who've ensured we could reach this moment, even when the going was tough. Over the past 60 years, thousands of people have contributed to this endeavor, and it took real vision to get us here. Building the National Ignition Facility was an enormous scientific and engineering challenge. I like Dr. Prabakar's emphasis on the importance of bringing those two together. In the end, after all that work, the laser has exceeded its performance goals, opened whole new areas of high energy density science to exploration, and delivered the data we need to keep our nuclear deterrent safe, secure, and effective. Our pursuit of fusion ignition over the past decade at NIF was an incredibly ambitious technical goal. Many said it was not possible. The laser wasn't energetic enough. The targets would never be precise enough. Our modeling and simulation tools were just not up to the task of this complex physics. Progress has taken time, but last August, when we achieved a then record yield of 1.35 megajoules, putting us at the threshold of ignition, many took notice. And last week, our pre-shot predictions, improved by machine learning and the wealth of data we've collected, indicated that we had a better than 50% chance of exceeding target gain of 1. 60 years ago, when John Knuckles and his team proposed that lasers could be used to produce fusion ignition in the laboratory, it was beyond audacious. The laser had just been invented and was far from the mature tool we know today. But this is really what national labs are for: tackling the most difficult scientific challenges head-on, learning from the inevitable setbacks, and building toward the next idea. Lawrence Livermore has been at the center of the ICF community across these many decades, and ICF has been a centerpiece of our lab. Indeed, people often say that LLNL stands for lasers, lasers, nothing but lasers. But I think our motto sums up our approach nicely: science and technology on a mission. This achievement opens up new scientific realms for us to explore and advances our capabilities for our national security missions. It demonstrates the power of US leadership in science and technology and shows what we're capable of as a nation. And as the Secretary mentioned, breakthroughs like this one have generated tremendous excitement in the fusion community and a great deal of private sector investment in fusion energy. But this is only possible due to the long-term commitment of public investment in fusion science. The science and technology challenges on the path to fusion energy are daunting, but making the seemingly impossible possible is when we're at our very best. Ignition is a first step, a truly monumental one that sets the stage for a transformational decade in high energy density science and fusion research, and I cannot wait to see where it takes us. Thank you. And I will hand the podium back to Secretary Granholm.
Great, thanks. We will open up for a few minutes of questions, and I think that our public affairs team, Chad, is going to be navigating that, and of course we have the experts.
And just
here.
give your name and your outlet, please. We're taking questions on this topic. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Ari Natter from Bloomberg News. I'm curious how long you think it'll be until we see commercialization of this technology, and also as a follow-up, if this happened on last Monday, why are we just hearing about it now? Thank you.
It's going to take a while before we see this commercialized. I don't know if you want to say a word about that.
Sure. Yes, there are very significant hurdles, not just in the science, but in technology. This is one igniting capsule, one time. And to realize commercial fusion energy, you have to do many things. You have to be able to produce many, many fusion ignition events per minute. And you have to have a robust system of drivers to enable that. So, probably decades, not 6 decades, I don't think. I think not 5 decades, which is what we used to say. I think it's moving into the foreground, and probably, with concerted effort and investment, a few decades of research on the underlying technologies could put us in a position to build a power plant. On the question of what we've been doing for the last week, the team has been hard at work analyzing data. It turns out that when you ignite one of these capsules, it's unambiguous that something big happened. You make a lot of neutrons, but the data is not trivial to analyze, and the team invited all of their team members who understand the individual diagnostics to come in and work together to look at all the data to make sure we had the numbers right. And we brought in an external team of experts to do a peer review before we were ready to release the numbers. It's really important that we tell you the facts and that we get them right before we go public. So that's what we've been doing for a week. So.
You should probably stay there.
Two quick questions. One, I know this the positive net return is the important thing, but how much energy does it take? That we talk about the wall plug energy. How much wall plug energy did it take? And are there implications for other types of fusion? Is this something that could inform magnetic confinement fusion as well?
So the laser requires about 300 megajoules of energy from the wall to drive 2 megajoules of laser energy, which drove 3 megajoules of fusion yield. Our calculations suggest that it's possible with a laser system at scale to achieve hundreds of megajoules of yield. So there is a pathway to a target that produces enough yield, but we're very distant from that right now. So 300 megajoules at the wall, 2 megajoules in the laser. So this really is talking about target gain greater than 1. And then there was a second part to your question.
Does it inform
Magnetic fusion, yes. So there are many common things about plasma science and the materials you need to work in fusion environments, diagnostic techniques, et cetera. Essentially, magnetic fusion works at low pressures and densities and for long times, whereas inertial confinement fusion works at high pressures and densities for very short times. So there are some similarities in the underlying physics, but the fundamental concepts are quite different.
Secretary Granholm, Pete Baer with E&E News. Congress has charged you and the department with making decisions about the most promising designs for a pilot fusion plant, and you're in the middle of that process now. How are you going to approach that, and what are your concerns about making those kind of choices?
Well, clearly, the folks who will be evaluating are the professionals in this, who are the scientists who do this work. And they will, like they do with all of these funding opportunity announcements, do a whole peer review process of each of the applications to determine which ones are most likely to be successful given the challenges. There's no parameters on whether these are magnetic confinement plants or laser confinement plants. We are just looking at the best proposals that come in, and hopefully we'll have a decision on that first 50 million at the early in the new year.
Hey there, Secretary. Gary Grumbach from NBC News here. There's questions about the ability to scale here, and that was touched on a little bit as it relates to power plants, et cetera. But can you talk about the ability to scale and who should be in charge of that scaling? Private, government, both?
Well, clearly, we want the private sector, and we need the private sector to get in the game. It's really important that there has been this incredible amount of U.S. public dollars going into this breakthrough. But all of the steps that we'll take that will be necessary to get this to commercial level will still require public research and private research. We know that there's been a huge interest among the private funding community, startups, et cetera, and we encourage that. The president has a decadal vision to get to a commercial fusion reactor within, obviously 10 years. So we've got to get to work, and this shows that it can be done, which has been a question. Can you get there? This demonstrates it can be done. That threshold being crossed allows them to start working on better lasers, more efficient lasers, on better containment capsules, et cetera. The things that are necessary to allow it to be modularized and taken to commercial scale.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to clarify, you're saying, there's a goal to get this in a decade. You had said that there would be decades, plural, in terms of commercialization. How do you reconcile that? What is the timeline here?
I think I get that. So there's two approaches to commercial fusion energy. One is based on magnetic fusion using devices like tokamaks. One is inertial fusion. There are private companies pursuing both approaches. The technology development, the foundational technology to begin to scale up toward a power plant is further along in the magnetic fusion community. And it's building more directly off the work that's been done in recent decades at facilities like JET in the United Kingdom, at the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, at MIT. to build the foundational technologies up for magnetic fusion energy. You know, the National Ignition Facility has been focused on creating this first step. If we could not ignite capsules in the laboratory, you could not see a pathway to an inertial confinement fusion energy plant. So this was a necessary first step. But the NIF is built foundationally on 1980s laser technology. So, you know, we need to bring modern technology approaches to the drivers. We need to think about all the systems questions. And now that we have a capsule that ignites, we need to figure out, can we make it simpler? Can we begin to make this process easier and more repeatable? Can we begin to do it more than one time a day? Can we start working toward rep rate? And each of these is an incredible scientific and engineering challenge for us. So while magnetic fusion may be a little bit in front, having that portfolio of approaches is really a great place to be, because these communities will feed off each other, we'll learn, we'll continue to advance the field, and many technologies will grow out of both fields in addition to the path to a fusion power plant. So that, you know, I think having both is really important. You'll hear in the panel about some of the potential advantages of an inertial confinement fusion approach. It's a little bit different. So I think it really is important to keep us on that pathway. And with investment, with energy, no pun intended, sorry about that, with real investment and real focus, you know, that timescale can move closer. We were in a position for a very long time where it never got closer, right? Because we needed this first fundamental step. So we're in a great position today to begin understanding just what it will take to make that next step, and then where that boundary is. I'm guessing, because I don't want to give you a sense that, you know, we're going to plug the NIF into the grid. That is definitely not how this works. But this is the fundamental building block of an inertial confinement fusion power scheme. So.
I'd like to acknowledge as well, Congressman Lofgren joined us as well. Thank you so much. And there are a number of DOE has 17 national labs. A number of those lab directors are also populating this audience as well. I know that Kim would say this has been a group project and would acknowledge the other labs that have contributed to this effort as well and are working on their solutions. So thank you everybody so much. And if you hang around for a few minutes, we're gonna break here and then set up for the technical panel for those who wish to stay. Thank you.
The technical panel will begin in approximately 10 minutes.
But once they get to the UK topic, they're cutting the fee. It's not
How are you? Good. Sorry, I heard you guys said you needed to get up. So nothing for I mean, you can hang out with me easily. Unless you want to get them. Because I think there are a bunch of numbers. It's fun to watch. Why are they breaking down like this? Oh, they're putting up for the panel.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, her match did actually. There was like.
Maybe in 5 minutes I should say the panel we will begin in approximately 5 minutes.
Yeah, right. You know, this is Jessica.
That was great. Oh yeah, it was wonderful. Oh, what the hell? Yeah, I don't know. no, I'll explain. We were at the Well, should I congratulate her? I should not talk to her. Really? I should play over it. Pro doesn't remember me. Oh no, I think she remembers you. Really? Wait, really? I think it's okay. I think it's all good. I think you got it. Quick question. Yes. How do I identify staffers for these professional firms? Does a reporter know staff? These two women in the suit, and I don't know who they're with, but they're staffers.
So Quieres, hold on.
Great. Right?
Come and take me.
Take meat. What? It was like Trevor. Trevor, what did you say?
Somebody you want to see the decoration in the cafeteria?
Yeah, not right now. Who told him to take me to see the decorations in the cafeteria? I can always stay for this. Do you want to stay for this? I'm going to go back up. I haven't done my front office review. Okay. I like fully just missed the GC meeting today. Here we go. Oh, you're the manager? Yeah. Do I have to stay? No. Oh, you're welcome. Was that who you wanted? It didn't matter. Oh, okay.
You wanted that summer guy. Yeah, yeah. So you wanted to change it.
It's muted right now.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Audio test 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Test 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Audio test 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Test complete. One more bottle of water.
I'm going to introduce you, and then get off.
Can I throw this underneath your, so I don't like hear it singing?
we ready to begin? Thank you all for staying on for this very exciting panel. I'm going to introduce the participants and then hand it over to our expert moderator. So these are the rock stars from Livermore who I'm going to tell you everything you ever wanted to know about what happened last Monday and beyond. First, we have Alex Zylstra, who was the principal experimentalist for this experiment. Annie Kreitcher, the principal designer and team lead for integrated modeling. Then we have Jean-Michel De Nicola, who's the chief engineer for the NIF laser system. Michael Staderman, target fabrication program manager. And then Art Pack, the team lead for stagnation science and the lead for diagnostics on this experiment. And Tammy Ma, who's the lead for Lawrence Livermore's Inertial Fusion Energy Institutional Initiative. And now to moderate the panel, I'm going to hand the mic over to Mark Herman, who's our program director for weapons physics and design and longtime fusion guy.
All right. Well, thanks. We're going to talk some more about today's exciting announcement, an inertial confinement fusion experiment that yielded more energy in fusion than we input with the laser. We got out 3.15 megajoules, we put in 2.05 megajoules in the laser. That's never been done before in any fusion laboratory anywhere in the world. So it's super exciting. And this team and the many, many hundreds of colleagues back at Lawrence Livermore are really pumped about that. I want to be clear, ultimately this experiment, as Kim mentioned, drew about 300 megajoules from the grid in order to fire the laser. The laser wasn't designed to be efficient. The laser was designed to give us as much juice as possible to make this incredible conditions happen, basically, in the laboratory. So there are many, many steps that would have to be made in order to get to inertial fusion as an energy source. So in this experiment, we used the world's most energetic laser, the National Ignition Facility, to create X-rays that cause a tiny capsule to implode and create a very hot, very high pressure plasma. And that plasma wants to immediately lose its energy. It wants to blow apart. It wants to radiate. It's looking for ways to cool down. But the fusion reactions are depositing heat in that plasma, causing it to heat up, right? So there's a race between heating and cooling. And if the plasma gets a little bit hotter, the fusion reaction rate goes up, creating even more fusions, which gets even more heating. And so the question is, can we win the race? And for many, many decades, we lost the race. We got more cooling out than we got the heating up, and so we didn't get to this ignition event. But last Monday, that all changed, and we were able to win the race and get very significant heating of the fusion plasma up to very high temperatures, which resulted in that yield of 3.15 megajoules. We study fusion ignition to keep our nuclear deterrent safe, secure, effective, and reliable, and do so without the need for further underground nuclear weapons testing. Fusion ignition is a key process in our thermonuclear weapons. And in addition, the very extreme environments created when the fusion plasma ignites enables testing that ensures we can maintain and modernize our nuclear deterrent. We hope that someday, and we'll talk some more about this, fusion could provide a base load carbon-free source of energy to power our planet. So I'm very delighted to be on stage with several representatives of the incredible, incredible team that made this possible. And now we're going to hear more from our panel of experts. And we're going to start with Alex.
Good morning. My name is Alex Zylstra. I was the principal experimentalist for the shot that we're discussing and the campaign that led up to it. And so I'm here on behalf of the experimental team. As Mark said, NIF is the most energetic laser facility in the world, is where we conduct these experiments. We take the laser energy and convert it into X-rays. So we need to decide how that process will work. Use those X-rays to compress the capsule that contains the fuel. If we can compress the fuel by a factor of more than 10,000, it reaches densities, temperatures, and pressures that are higher than the center of the sun. And that's what's required for our approach to fusion to work. So the job of the experimental team is to put all of the pieces together and ensure that nothing goes wrong. That actually starts months earlier for a shot. We begin working with the design team to decide on a concept that we want to test. Once that's decided, then we work with our colleagues in target fabrication and the laser science in order to bring those pieces of the experiment in. And then a few days before the shot, it's handed off to the operations crews in the facility. We work with them to actually execute the experiment because they're the ones who are actually hands-on in the facility making this a reality. The shot goes off, it takes only a few billionths of a second, and so we need an exquisite suite of diagnostics to measure what happened. And with those measurements, we can then increase our understanding of the particular experiment. I want to emphasize that each experiment we do is building on 60 years of work in this field and more than a decade on NIF itself. So we use that previous understanding in order to field design our experiments. Each experiment then contributes to the overall knowledge, both these main fusion ignition shots and also experiments that we do with specialized configurations and specialized diagnostics, all building the understanding that allows us to make progress. All that work led up to a moment just after 1 a.m. last Monday when we took a shot and we started to see hopefully that's not representative, but we took a shot just after 1 a.m. Last Monday, and as the data started to come in, we saw the first indications that we had produced more fusion energy than the laser input. And so I'm very excited to be here on behalf of the experimental team and with my colleagues on behalf of the entire NIF team to discuss it with you.
Good morning. I'm Annie Kreitcher. I'm the principal designer for the experiment and the campaign, and also team lead for integrated modeling of these experiments. And I'm here to represent the entire design team. So the role of a designer is to define the input conditions to the experiment to achieve the desired plasma conditions. And that includes the target geometry, dimensions, materials, etc., as well as the laser pulse. So we don't just smack the target with all of the laser energy all at once. We define very specific powers at very specific times to achieve the desired conditions. And we do this using a variety of tools, including complex plasma physics simulations, analytical models, and we benchmark them against experimental data. So the ultimate goal, as Alex mentioned, is to create a design that can reach the extreme conditions required for fusion ignition on a NIF. And in doing so, we were able to reach pressures more than 2 times the center of the sun on the last experiment and about 150 million degrees. And this requires a great deal of finesse and design optimization to reach these conditions, as well as continual learning over the many years of designs and results that we've collected at NIF. And specifically, there were 2 design changes that were made leading up to the most recent result that fed into it. So this most recent result is part of a new campaign or a new effort to make use of the new laser capability that Jan will talk about next. And that is making the capsule that holds the fusion fuel a little bit thicker. And that does 2 things. That gives us more margin for achieving ignition when we have non-optimal fielding conditions, as well as it lets us burn up more of the DT fusion fuel. So the first experiment in this campaign was performed in September. And the experiment we're talking about today made intentional design changes from the September shot also to improve the symmetry of the implosion. And with that, I'm happy to be here and to take questions and very excited about our team's work on this.
All right, good morning. I'm Jean-Michel Denicola, Chief Engineer for NIF Laser Systems. I'm representing the team of technician, engineer, and scientists who design, build, operate, and improve this unique laser facility. Together, our team is standing on the shoulder of multiple generations of optical material and laser physicists who design and optimized ever-increasing performance in terms of the laser delivery, following the seminal paper from John Knuckles Livermore, who basically lay down the concept for nuclear fusion using lasers. However, we also want to acknowledge numerous collaborators, other national labs, university, industry, as well as international partners, and of course, continued support from DOE and NSA and Congress for this mission so important for national security. Thanks to outstanding science and technology and our team, Livermore with collaborator made the impossible possible. The NIF laser is the largest laser in the world. It has the size of 3 football fields, and it delivers an energy in excess of 2 million joules with a peak power of 500 trillion watts. For a very short amount of time, we are talking only about a few billionth of a seconds, it exceeds the entire grid, US power grid. The laser, however, achieving the ignition, however, requires more than brute force. As Annie described, there are extremely fine tunings that needs to be performed to match the condition for ignition. Precision has been our focus for the last few years, and we have been delivering more symmetric implosion and more reproducible experiments. In addition, thanks to the continued investment from the nation, we have been able to deliver 8% more energy on the experiments last week compared to the one last year. It goes along with additional efforts that will be brought during the summer, and in next summer we'll be able to design experiments and field shots with additional 8% of laser energy, providing more margins for ignition. In the future, with the sustainment and upgrade investment, the NIF laser could produce even higher energies and power, and give the promise to larger target gains. That would be enabling additional extreme conditions for science-based stockpile stewardship program and maintain the United States of America leadership in this field. I'll pass it over to Michael.
Good morning. I am Michael Staderman. I am the program manager for target fabrication at Livermore. I'm here to present a team of over 100 members that is responsible for making almost all targets shot on NIF, and that comprises members of General Atomics, of Dye Materials in Germany, and of Lawrence Livermore. The most important component that we deliver for fusion targets is the fuel capsule. Fuel capsule is a BB point-sized shell made of diamond that needs to be as perfect as possible. We've been working over the last 16 years on continuously improving the quality of these shells to get to the state where we are today. And in turn, that effort has been based on decades of prior capsule development activities that have been done at Livermore and elsewhere. Today's shells are almost perfectly round. They're 100 times smoother than a mirror, and they have a tiny tube attached to them that's about a 50th the diameter of a hair, through which the fuel is filled into the shell. As you can imagine, perfection is really hard, and so we've yet to get there. We still have tiny flaws on our shells, smaller than bacteria, that could be, for example, pits on the surface or holes in the wall. And despite their small size, these flaws still have the potential to affect the experiment. So not only do we make the shells, but we also characterize the shells and share the results with our colleagues so that we can select the best shell for each experiment. How strongly an experiment is affected by the flaws depends on the design input that Annie was talking about. And it looks like the result from Monday is a more robust design that is less affected. This is very encouraging for us because we know that the shell that we shot had flaws in it. And this gives us confidence that we can make shells of equal quality or even better quality in the future that will be able to reproduce this experiment or even improve on it. Yeah, so with that, I'll pass it on to Art.
Thanks. My name is Arthur Pack. I'm the team lead for stagnation science, which is really focused on trying to understand how to create the conditions to achieve ignition at the NIF. So I'm responsible for coordinating the portfolio of integrated experiments that's been pursuing ignition, as well as overseeing the analysis groups that take these observations we get from the experiments and try to understand the conditions of the fusion plasma. And this has been really critically important to understand these conditions, as I'll talk about. And it's really been enabled by sort of state-of-the-art diagnostics, optical, X-ray, and nuclear diagnostics that have been developed over decades of work by an exceptional team of engineers and scientists from Lawrence Livermore and from other national laboratories in the US, the UK, and France, in addition with major contributions from our domestic and international academic and industry partners. So for each experiment, we field over 50 scientific measurements to diagnose key quantities of the reacting fusion plasma, such as the temperature, the fusion energy yield, the duration over which this occurs. And to give you a sense of scale and just how remarkable these diagnostics are, the plasma we're trying to measure is a 1/10 of a millimeter in diameter. So that's the thickness of a strand or two of human hair. As was mentioned, the temperatures of these plasmas are over 100 million degrees, so that's 10 times hotter than the center of the sun. And the entire reactions occur in a fraction of a nanosecond, so that's about 1 billion times faster than you can blink your eye. And then as Alex mentioned, we're only able to get these great measurements due to this sort of tireless work of technicians and operators who field them at the NIF facility and allow us to get these amazing observations to help us understand what's going on. And these observations have been really critical for our progress. So they've helped to identify, quantify, and mitigate degradations or loss mechanisms which have impeded our progress. They allow us to test hypotheses and design changes to understand what are the sensitivities of the system. And so I'm here today on behalf of these diagnostic groups to help answer any questions and talk about what we can learn from these experiments. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Tammy Ma, and I am the lead for the Lawrence Livermore Institutional Initiative in Inertial Fusion Energy, or what we call IFE. Developing an economically attractive approach to fusion energy is a grand scientific and engineering challenge. Without a doubt, it will be a monumental undertaking. However, the potential benefits are enormous. Clean, carbon-free, abundant, reliable energy capable of meeting the world's energy demands, and furthermore, providing for the energy sovereignty and energy security of the US. As the Secretary mentioned earlier today, this spring, the White House hosted a summit announcing a bold decadal vision for fusion energy, building on great advances we had in both inertial and magnetic confinement fusion. These recent results on the NIF are the first time in a laboratory anywhere on Earth we were able to demonstrate more energy coming out of a fusion reaction than was put in. This lays the groundwork. It demonstrates the basic scientific feasibility of inertial fusion energy and sets the roadmap for us to move forward to even higher gains and towards fusion pilot plants in the coming decades. The Department of Energy, Office of Fusion Energy Sciences recently commissioned a basic research needs report in inertial fusion energy. This report will help lay out the framework for a new IFE program here in the US, and that report should be coming out imminently. Such a program will inevitably require participation from across the community, both the public sector, but the private sector as well. So of course, new fusion startup companies, their investors, national labs, universities, academia, public utilities, and more. We look forward to working with the Department of Energy to leverage and capitalize on these great results for a fusion energy future. The time is now. And I will hand it back to Mark.
Thanks, Tammy. So we're going to ask each panelist a question here, and then we'll open it up to the floor. Annie, this experiment improved on an experiment, as you mentioned, that we had done in September of 2022, and it was a modified design from the one in August of 2021. Can you explain how you used physics insights and simulations to make changes in the design for this recent experiment?
Sure. So we do rely on our detailed radiation hydrodynamic simulations to design many aspects of our implosions. However, we know that there's areas of parameter space where we might not be as predictive. So we have developed experimental playbooks and analytical models And I used a combination, our design team used a combination of both to make the adjustment from September going into this latest experiment. There was two sort of different flavors of symmetry adjustments that were made. One is during sort of the second half of the laser time history, and one is during the first half of the laser time history. During the second half of the laser time history, we transferred more energy between laser beams to control the symmetry. So that's actually quite a useful tool, and if you haven't heard about it, it's really awesome. You can move energy between beams and control symmetry that way. In doing so, you have to go back and readjust the symmetry during the first half of the laser pulse. And we did that, but we also did that making an additional adjustment with improved models based on data that were collected just in the last few months. So in that piece, we really do rely on our models to benchmark against tuning data and then extrapolate out to the design space. And just for perspective, we're talking about compressing something the size of a basketball down to the size of a pea, controlling that compression symmetry to about 1% in drive, and also the final symmetry to just a few percent. So it's quite a challenging problem, and we have great tools to get there.
Thanks, Annie. Jean-Michel, for many years, the maximum laser energy on NIF was 1.9 megajoules, but in this experiment, you turned the laser up to 2.05 megajoules. How did you and your team make sure that this would be safe to operate the laser at these higher laser energies?
Thank you, Mark. First of all, I would like to point out that the National Ignition Facility is one of the first generation of the inertial confinement fusion to meet and exceed its requirement. So it's by itself quite a grand challenge to do that, because those laser architectures are extremely complex and are a marvel of engineering and laser physics and nonlinear optics. Second, since the commissioning of the National Ignition Facility, we have continuously increased the energy and power over a few years to make sure that we were obtaining the regime where ignition experiment could take place in favorable conditions. In parallel, there was a tremendous amount of investment in terms of optics, science and technology, as well as laser physics, to have the optics that would be higher performance compared to the previous generation, and we gained orders of magnitude compared to previous generation, no questions about it. We perform also a lot of work trying to control the shape of the laser in space and time to make sure we can transmit the maximum throughput through the optics with maximum reliability. Last but not least, we also figured out that some of the debris are migrating back into the laser from the target experiment and ignition. When it takes place, debris are transported back near the optics, and finding and mitigating those debris sources was also a key instrument. So very minor modification to the laser architecture, and we published a paper in 2019 in Nuclear Fusion if you want more detail about that.
Thanks, Jam. Alex, many elements have to come together to enable a successful NIF experiment. We need a good target, a cryogenic ice layer, we need the lasers to be specified, and we need to make sure the diagnostics are going to be taking the pictures at the right time. So how did you prepare for this experiment knowing it had the potential to be a really exciting shot?
Yeah, so one of the things that's so challenging with these experiments is that any one thing going wrong can be enough to prevent ignition. So everything has to be right. And so we really have to sweat the small stuff. To kind of give you a sense for that, Annie discussed our tuning of the symmetry. We had a debate over a laser setting equivalent to 5 trillionths of a meter going into this experiment. We had a discussion with the laser science team over timing discrepancies of 25 trillionths of a second. With the target, each target we look at all of the flaws that Michael was describing that are the size of a bacteria to decide if they're acceptable or not. They then grow a cryogenic DT ice layer, which has the same sorts of requirements. Bacteria-sized defects can be problematic. And then we're setting up the diagnostics where small timing errors, a billionth of a second would be an eternity for us in this experiment. We're trying to image something that's the brightest thing on Earth for 100 trillionths of a second. And so getting all of that right is a team effort going through an intense review process.
Thanks. Art, how do we know this experiment passed the threshold of ignition and got more fusion energy out than laser energy in? for the first time in history.
Yeah, thanks. So in these experiments, we use deuterium and tritium as our fusion fuel, which are isotopes of hydrogen. And when these two ions fuse, they release a helium ion or an alpha particle and a neutron. And they're released with very well-known energies. Now the alpha particle, it stays in the plasma, further heating it, leading to more fusion reactions, while the neutrons largely escape. And so if we can measure the number of escaping neutrons, then we know how many reactions took place. And then we just multiply the number of reactions by the energy released for each fusion. And that's how we measure the fusion energy. So in this experiment, to get a target gain 1, we used 2.05 megajoules of laser energy. So to exceed 1, we need to make at least that much fusion energy. So the way we measure the number of neutrons, we do that multiple ways using independent diagnostics. But one of the methods we use is to place a high purity metal sample close to the reactions. That gets irradiated by the escaping neutrons and becomes radioactive. So the unstable states in this foil will then decay. And because we know very well the rate of activation and decay, we can then measure how many neutrons went through that foil, what the total number of neutrons were, and how much fusion energy was released. We have other methods. So another independent method is to turn the escaping neutrons into a charged particle spectrum, disperse that using a magnetic spectrometer, and sweep that onto a piece of film, and so we can actually measure the number of sort of incident neutrons directly. So all these different methods give us very, very high confidence that we produced 3.15 megajoules of fusion energy, which corresponds to a gain of roughly 1.5. So that's how we know.
Thanks, Art. So Michael, you talked about the targets. They're incredible marvels of engineering and manufacturing. Can you briefly describe how you've been working to actually make them even better, the thin spherical diamond shells that contain the fusion fuel?
Sure, Mark. So the main problem that we have right now with getting perfect capsules are small flaws. And so to be able to improve on the flaws, the first thing that we have to be able to do is actually see them, measure them, count them, and quantify how many of the flaws are on a shell. The primary tool that we use today to characterize a shell is X-ray tomography. X-ray tomography generates a lot of data, and in the past it has required trained experts a lot of time to go through these images and basically find the needle in the haystack. So now what we're working on is software that helps us in this process that hopefully will be more accurate than a human in the longer run, that will help us quantify exactly to see how many flaws there are, how big they are, and whether when we're making a change to the deposition, to the fabrication process, whether that actually improves the number of flaws and their size. So that's the characterization part. On the actual improvement of the material, we are working very closely with our collaborators in Germany at Dye Materials to look at the fabrication conditions. We're working as a team using the others' capabilities as a reference to our own so that we can isolate the problem to machine operation or surroundings. And this process has been very fruitful for narrowing down a set of conditions that has allowed us to improve the target beyond where we are today.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, Tammy. So to power the laser for this experiment, to get that 2.05 megajoules, we had to pull about 300 megajoules from the grid. And then we got out 3.15 megajoules of fusion energy, right? So why do we think it's possible to turn this into an energy source in the future?
That's a great question. Thank you, Mark. The NIF is a scientific demonstration facility. And when we built the NIF, the considerations that you have to build that facility are a little bit different than if you're going to build a fusion power plant. So for example, maximizing the efficiency of every single component is not necessarily the most important thing. And so for example, the wall plug efficiency of the laser was not necessarily a very important requirement for this science facility. However, as Kim alluded to, the NIF is now over 20 years old. The technology inside the NIF is 80s, 90s technology, and things have progressed quite a lot since then. We have new laser architectures that can not only run at rep rate, but are far more efficient, up to something around 20% wall plug efficiency. There's also been enormous advancements in target fabrication, new materials, computation and simulations, the application of machine learning. So it's a really exciting time because we get to incorporate all of these emerging technologies with this new scientific understanding that we've developed to really push towards inertial fusion energy. And I'll also note the perseverance it took us to get here. As has been mentioned, it's been 60 years since ignition was first dreamed of using lasers. And it's really a testament to the perseverance, dedication of the folks that made this happen. It also means we have the perseverance to get to fusion energy on the grid.
Thanks, Tammy. And thanks, panel. And then now we're going to open it up to questions. I don't know.
First off, I think a round of applause for our panelists.
Testing. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm NNSA Public Affairs Deputy Director Shaila Hassan. I want to thank those of you who stayed for this more technical discussion with the folks that actually made this happen. It's a very exciting day for NNSA, so we're going to start the Q&A portion. We have a little bit more time with media. So if there are any media folks who came late and need to move up, this is where we have media seated, just to make sure you get your questions in. And my colleague Jeremy will be there on the other side to get a mic if you're a little too far and feel like you need to reach. So if you could please state your name and your outlet before your question, otherwise I will remind you.
Hey, it's Ari Natter from Bloomberg. What was the cost of the targets you're using? And also, what fraction of the fusion fuel was actually converted to energy during the shot? Thank you.
I want to take the, I'm happy to jump in. Michael, you want to, I think the way to think of the targets is how long does it take for someone to build them, right? Because the predominant cost is the labor of the people. And so they take months to build, right?
Well, so the components that comprise a target take a variety of different times to make. The actual assembly of the target only takes about 2 weeks. To make the fuel capsule, however, takes 7 months from the inception of what you want to the delivery of the capsule. The targets that we are using today are designed for science, right? They're designed to be flexible so that we can reconfigure them as we want to learn different things. And they're designed to be able to see what's going on. So these targets are not designed for fusion energy.
Is there a dollar amount, though, monetary figure?
No, I don't think it's kind of like we're sized. We have a staff that can produce the targets we need per year on NIF, and so it's really about a workforce more than a dollars per target. The components, the actual amount of gold or carbon or whatever are actually really, really cheap, right? I mean, the actual cost of the materials and the targets is next to nothing. It's all the labor that goes into it that makes it time consuming.
To answer the second part of your question, it was about 4% of the DT that was burned on the shot.
All right, thank you. And before we go back to media, we have a question from our administrator, Jill Ruby.
Well, thanks. I often talk about how special the national laboratories are because we do team science. And there's no better example of that than what we just heard from you. But I'm guessing maybe you didn't come expecting to do exactly what just happened. So I'd be very interested in just like short stories about why did you come and why do you stay at the lab? Thank you.
I think I can give a quick answer to that. So I actually toured NIF while it was under construction as an undergraduate. And so seeing the scale of what was possible at the national laboratories is what drew me in, as well as being able to see the ability to do great science that has an actual impact on national security and energy applications. And so yeah, I hope that anyone watching who's inspired by this current moment comes to work with us in the future and take this to the next level.
Yeah, and I actually have a very similar story, so you might notice a trend here. I came as an undergraduate in 2004, and I saw NIF, and I thought this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be part of this large interdisciplinary teams working together, grand challenge on problems that move humanity forward and are so important for the nation. Also, it's just fun to tell your friends you shoot big lasers, and my dad really liked it as well. So.
All right, we've got one question over here.
Hi, Michael Greshko, National Geographic. Thank you all for being here and congratulations. What time on December 5th did the shot occur? And for each of you, in the minutes and hours after that, how did you first learn that this shot was special?
I can start with that. So the shot went off, I believe, at 1:03 a.m. last Monday. And so I was up to look at the data. And as the data started to come in, we started to see some indications that this had happened. And one of the first things I did was call one of the diagnostic experts to double check the data. And we kind of went from there.
So I had vivid dreams of all possible outcomes from the shot. This always happens before a shot, from like complete success to utter failure. And then I woke up, thankfully, Alex had sent me a message. So by the time I woke up, I saw that it wasn't a failure. And then, of course, I start emailing you, texting you right away. And, yeah, so just amazing feeling of you start looking at, you see one diagnostic and you think, well, maybe that's not real. And then you start to see more and more diagnostics rolling in, pointing to the same thing. And it's just a great feeling.
So for the laser team, the work started earlier in the night because we had to check and make sure during the preparation stages of the experiment we're on track to a successful delivery. So numerous phone calls, emails, checking of the results real time, giving the green light to proceed, and then the relief when we see the result and the laser didn't screw up the experiment. That was relief number one. And then we start to receive the text with potential yields, and that's, eureka and Eura moments. So.
Well, for target fabrication, our work usually ends somewhere about a week before the shot when we deliver the target to the facility. We had high hopes for this one, so I was checking email as soon as I woke up to see how the shot did, and was very excited about the numbers that I saw.
Yeah, so as Annie mentioned, we're building off of prior experiments, and we had good reason to be optimistic for this experiment, so I was very keyed in and curious. But as it started going later and later, I gotta get the kids up in the morning, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to bed. But I woke up at 3 in the morning, just out of sleep, and I went to check my email, and I saw the number, and of course I'd done the math before the experiment, so I knew what number I wanted to see for gain greater than 1, and so the preliminary data came out, and I was like, holy smokes. So that's how I sort of, and then I went back to bed, or tried to go back to bed, which was,
I actually didn't find out until the next morning. I was at the airport at SFO about to board a plane to come to DC actually to attend the Fusion Power Associates meeting, which is an annual meeting where we have fusion leaders coming together to really work together on how to push forward fusion energy. But anyways, I got a call from my boss saying, I think we got ignition. And I burst into tears. And I was jumping up and down in the waiting area, the crazy person. Yeah, the tears were streaming down my face. After all these years, every time I walk into the National Ignition Facility, I still get goosebumps. And so it's a wonderful place to work, and I'm so proud of this team.
Thank you all.
Hi, James Reardon, Science News Magazine. Since the ignition, the prior one, that was an important event, have there been events like this that have been failures, that have been disappointments? And why on earth would you do it at 1 a.m.? Is there a technical reason?
Yeah, so following last year's experiment, we tried to repeat that experiment 3 or 4 times. And what we learned from those experiments was that this design was still very sensitive to the target defects that were present. And so we were able to quantify the impact and understand, the origin of these defects. And so knowing that, we went for improved designs to make ourselves more robust. We used that knowledge to try to pick the best capsules to minimize the impact. And so that's why what led us to this event here. And why 1 a.m.? So NIF runs 24/7. So to grow these ice layers, it's a multi-day process. And so it's not fully deterministic, so you'll try, it will fail, you'll try to grow again. And so it just happens that the shot cycle goes that way, and we take the shot when we're ready to take the shot. So.
James Osborne, Houston Chronicle. There's two fusion technologies, magnetic confinement and inertial. Can you sort of explain where your breakthrough, does that sort of put inertial at the forefront now? Is that the technology society is going to pursue, or does it have implications for magnetic that might allow that to continue? I think it was implied earlier that magnetic had sort of seen more advances of late. Obviously, though, this is the big breakthrough. So if somebody could sort of explain that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely pros and cons for each different approach. And there's different technology developments that need to occur. And so both magnetic fusion and inertial have made great advances in the past couple of years. There's also been enormous private sector investment, actually more on the magnetic side than the inertial side in recent years. I think what we've been able to demonstrate on the NIF is a burning plasma. We've gotten gain. However, like Kim alluded to, we're a little bit farther behind in some of the technology developments because that's just not what we've been focused on the past few years. That being said, there's a lot of different commonalities. There's a lot of commonalities between the two where we can learn from each other. There's burning plasma physics, material science, reactor engineering, and we're very supportive of each other in this community. A win for either inertial or magnetic confinement is a win for all of us, and we really just want to see fusion energy happen. And the point is, though, that there are different technological risks for both of them. Right now, fusion is so incredibly impactful and important for humankind that what we really want to do is maximize the potential pathways to success. So we want to carry these different approaches and see what will really work.
Pete Bear with EE News. Could you give us your vision of what a commercial fusion plant would look like using this technology? Jump ahead a couple of decades. What might this production of energy look like?
So right now there are a number of different approaches to target physics that could actually get us to high gain, high margin. All of those have slightly different drivers. So for what we're doing on the NIF, we use high energy lasers, but there are designs using heavy ions, pulse power, et cetera, et cetera. And there's been a number of different integrated studies to try to pull all of this together. Really where we are right now is at a divergent point. We've been very lucky to be able to leverage the work that the NNSA has done for inertial confinement fusion. But if we want to get serious about IFE, we are at a point where we need to invest in those technologies. We need to figure out what that integrated system looks like, because the target, like Michael said, is complex. It takes a long time to build. And what we need for a power plant, it has to be simple, it has to be high volume, it needs to be robust, and there are trade-offs. If you can get to higher gain with your target, you can turn down your laser energy or your laser efficiency a little bit. There are decisions to be made about the materials that you would use for your reactor. Those would impact your design as well. So what we're doing now with the Department of Energy is actually embarking on doing these integrated system studies, again, with our best known information about technology as it's evolved today, and to figure out where the biggest gaps are, where we need to invest, where we need to buy down risk, and that will be an ongoing activity for quite a few years. But with this bold decadal vision, we are really trying to accelerate and put together these designs to see what is the most viable, feasible design, and all come together to work on it.
Hi, Dave Netchapier, FedScoop. The director mentioned earlier that machine learning played a key role in sort of the in-between between the reaching the threshold to ignition and then this latest test. So I'm curious, how have advances in machine learning and computing helped you in your work, and how do you anticipate they might help you moving forward?
Yeah, I can take that question. So we have made quite a bit of advances in our machine learning models to kind of tie together our complex radiation hydrodynamic simulations with the experimental data and learning. Specifically going between the August 8th, 2021 experiment and this latest experiment, we used it more for the predictability phase versus the design phase for this change. So for this change, we sort of used our traditional design methods of not running thousands of simulations, but then we fed the design to the team, the CogSim machine learning team, and have them do an analysis of the design, and they did find that it had a higher probability of achieving gain of 1. So with the CogSim models, we're able to look at if the design is more robust to some of the issues that we had been having last year.
Thanks, Annie. Now I believe we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So before we go back to Nat Geo.
David Crandall, retired from Department of Energy, where I spent 30 years, and most of it related to fusion, and most of it related to NIF. The target for 08-08-21, the physics ignition shot, was deemed to be the most pure target you ever shot. How did this one compare?
Yes, as you mentioned, the target for 21-08-08 was probably the most pristine shell that we've ever had. It even compared favorably to the other shells in the batch, as we learned later on as we reanalyzed the data for all those shells. This target here had a substantial number of flaws compared to that one. Specifically at higher, it has tungsten inclusions in a large number.
All right, time for our final question.
James Reardon, Science News Magazine. So this experiment is specifically interested in the search for ignition, but most of your research is focused on stockpile stewardship, is it not? And in that case, what fraction is dedicated to this sort of research? What fraction is dedicated to stockpile stewardship? And do these sorts of shots have any important information in them for stockpile stewardship?
Sure. I'm happy to take that one. So the ignition work we're doing is for stockpile stewardship, right? Our thermonuclear weapons have fusion ignition that takes place in our weapons. And so studying fusion ignition is something we do to support the stockpile stewardship program. In addition, fusion ignition creates these very extreme environments that we have no other way to access on Earth. And in fact, in this experiment, for the first time ever, we were able to put some samples of materials that are important for our future stockpile modernization efforts that are going on at Lawrence Livermore today in very close to this intense neutron burst, and then see how did they respond to that intense neutron burst. So we're actually using the output from these really cool science experiments, and which we're also trying to understand, but we're also using it to actually test materials for stewardship applications. But to your other question, roughly speaking, about 15% of the experiments we do on NIF are indirect drive experiments of the type that this experiment was. We do another roughly 15% that are other types of fusion experiments, inertial confinement fusion, but using different approaches. And then the rest of them look at things like the behavior of materials at high pressures and getting data that's important to use in our simulations for our nuclear weapons, understanding the behavior of radiation in very complex environments and geometries, understanding how hydrodynamic plasmas mix at very high temperatures. All of those things help us benchmark our simulation tools, learn new things about how matter behaves in these really extreme conditions, and underpins the confidence we have in our deterrent.
Thank you. And we had a question over here.
Well, thank you. How many questions do I get to ask?
As many as you want.
No, this is really exciting. My understanding was that the experiment in 2021 was a little unexpected result, which was really good news. And then it was kind of hard to repeat that result. So was it more the target, and something that Annie brought up that I hadn't been aware of is the time history of the laser pulses is also important. So first question is what's more dominant, the time history or the target? And a question for Arthur, how many orders of magnitude of neutron flux do you have to monitor to get a full picture?
So I can answer the last question first, perhaps. So, as Alex pointed out, many things have to happen, have to go right, basically, for these experiments to really reach very, very high yields and gains. So we have to set up our diagnostics to capture that event, but we also have to set up the diagnostics to capture lower orders of magnitude, so that if it doesn't go right, we understand what happened, what was the failure mechanism, so that we can fix it in the future. And so, right now, I think we have something like 3 orders or so of dynamic range that we can measure. So we have predictions of how we set up the diagnostics. And we try to go above and below to make sure we get good measurements. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I can take a crack at the other one. So I'm going into 210808 or August 8th of 2021 experiment. We predicted about half the yield increase that we got. We got about 8 times the yield increase, and we predicted about 4 times. And the reason for that is because we had improved the capsule quality, like was mentioned earlier. So going into the pre-shot prediction, we're assuming the same capsule quality with some other design changes that were being made. We did perform a set of experiments after that to try to piece apart which is quality and which is the other design changes, and it was pretty consistent with that sort of split between the two. Following that experiment, we haven't been able to replicate the same capsule quality, and that is a main driver because these defects are extremely difficult to model and predict. It's been a main driver in the performance as well as the predictability. So then the thought was to try to design our way around some of these stringent requirements. And what was the other part of your question? The time history. The time history, yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you. So the time history, there's different forms of asymmetries. And the one that I'm talking about, the change that was made between September and this most recent experiment, was a slightly different type of, that's an intrinsic symmetry correction. During the repeat experiments, we did have 2 experiments that had an anomalous laser deviation, which is a mode 1. So that means, for example, if the laser delivered differently on top versus bottom, that would push the implosion in one direction. So something that's not designed or expected that did impact 2 of those experiments. But ever since then, we've been quite good, and maybe JM can talk about the improvements made there, that hasn't been as big of an issue.
Yeah, I can elaborate if you like. We basically are in the process of modernizing what we call the front end of the laser, which is based on the fiber optics technology. The NIF laser was first commissioned at low level in 2001, so this part of the laser was literally 20-year-old. And as you can imagine, in telecom industry, over 20 years, there has been many revolutions. And so we were able to catch up and capitalize on the latest technologies to improve this delivery.
All right, time for our final question. I think we have one over here.
James Osborne, Houston Chronicle again. I think you've probably answered this, but maybe just for the layman among us. So if the shell quality wasn't as clean on this experiment. What in fact made the difference where you were able to achieve this breakthrough this time? What do you attribute it to?
Yeah, so we shot basically the same capsule quality in September, so that part remained constant between the two experiments. And in September, we achieved about 1.22 megajoules. So being able to first achieve megajoule yields again with worse capsule quality than August 8th, 2021, that was the first step, and that was attributed to the enhanced laser capability and the design change of the thicker target. And then moving between September and the most recent experiment, the only changes to the input conditions were to improve this intrinsic low mode asymmetry. So make the implosion more symmetric as it's coming in. You can better couple your driver energy to the hot plasma.
All right, I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and I'd like to thank Dr. Herman and the panel for taking time to share this amazing achievement with us after what must be a whirlwind week. One more round of applause, please. And with that, that concludes our NIF press conference event. Thank you for coming.